A black billionaire woman stands before her own jet, only to face a smug, dismissive crew who refuse to let her board. What happens next is a powerful lesson in dignity, justice, and the dismantling of prejudice. Samantha Johnson didn't just break glass ceilings, she shattered them with unapologetic force. At 34 years old, she was a self-made billionaire, the kind of tech visionary who turned impossibilities into innovations. Her name was synonymous with resilience, a symbol of what could be achieved when brilliance met relentless determination. But Samantha's journey to the top wasn't paved with ease. Born in a modest neighborhood of Detroit, Samantha grew up in a world tried to tell her what she couldn't be. As a young black girl with a fierce curiosity about computers, she often found herself the only one like her in the room. Teachers doubted her, peers underestimated her, and society constantly reminded her of the barriers stacked against her. But Samantha's father, a factory worker, always told her, "They don't get to decide your future. You do." That mantra carried her through every obstacle. In college, she built her first app, a data visualization tool, while juggling multiple part-time jobs. Despite her innovations, tech investors routinely dismissed her ideas, questioning her abilities with thinly veiled biases. "You're ambitious for someone so inexperienced," they'd say. She learned early that words like inexperienced and bold were often code for "we don't believe in you." Instead of faltering, Samantha doubled down, funding her first startup with crowdfunding and community support. By the time her third product launched, the tech world could no longer ignore her brilliance. Now, Samantha was a household name, her company a leader in artificial intelligence solutions. But success hadn't insulated her from prejudice. Even as one of the wealthiest women in the world, she knew that systemic biases didn't disappear with a bigger paycheck. That understanding drove her latest mission. Today, Samantha was heading to New York to announce Future Minds, an initiative designed to make the STEM fields more inclusive for women and underrepresented minorities. It was a project close to her heart, offering scholarships, mentorships, and resources for those whose talents were too often overlooked. For Samantha, this wasn't just a business trip, it was a chance to remind the world that inclusivity wasn't just a lofty goal, but a necessity for innovation. As she stepped out of the sleek black SUV and onto the private tarmac, the weight of her mission wasn't lost on her. The sun glinted off her gold watch, a symbol of hard-fought victories, and Samantha adjusted her tailored navy blazer. This wasn't just another day at work. This was a statement. The hum of private jets filled the air as Samantha Johnson stepped out of the sleek black SUV onto the sunlit tarmac. Miami's morning breeze carried a faint tang of salt from the nearby ocean, but Samantha's focus was unwavering. She adjusted the cuff of her tailored navy blazer, her gold watch glinting in the sunlight, a quiet testament to the battles she had fought to stand here. Ahead of her stood the jet, a gleaming symbol of her success, its polished silver body reflecting the clear blue sky. The runway buzzed with activity as crew members moved about, their uniforms crisp, their voices low. Samantha's heels clicked against the asphalt as she walked toward the plane, each step deliberate, each movement exuding calm authority. Beside her, Marcus carried her briefcase and tablet, his usual easy smile replaced with a focused expression. He glanced at Samantha, sensing the weight of the day ahead. Today wasn't just another flight, it was the beginning of something bigger. As they approached, Samantha noticed a group of crew members clustered near the jet's staircase. Their murmured conversations halted as their eyes flicked toward her, some lingering longer than necessary. The faintest trace of amusement played on their faces, barely concealed behind polite indifference. Samantha's gaze remained steady, betraying nothing. She had seen those looks before, the unspoken skepticism, the quiet judgment. It was a script she knew too well, but one she refused to follow. Marcus leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Everything okay, Samantha?" "Always," she replied with calm resolve, her tone as steady as her stride. The jet loomed larger as they neared, but so did the tension in the air. Samantha had learned long ago that success didn't silence doubt, it only amplified it in the eyes of those unwilling to believe. And today she was ready to remind them who she was. As Samantha reached the base of the jet's staircase, a man stepped forward from the crew, his polished uniform a stark contrast to the smirk playing on his face. Captain Thomas Sanders, the pilot, carried himself with an air of practiced authority. His piercing blue eyes swept over Samantha briefly, betraying the flicker of skepticism before he plastered on a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth but edged with a subtle condescension. "I'm afraid there might be a misunderstanding. This jet is reserved for VIPs. For a moment, the words hung in the air, cutting through the faint hum of engines in the background. Samantha's sharp gaze locked onto his, her expression unreadable. "There's no misunderstanding," she replied evenly. Her voice was calm, controlled, but carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "I am the VIP." Captain Sanders blinked, as if caught off guard by her directness. Then, as though recovering from his momentary lapse, his smirk deepened. "Ah," he said, dragging out the word. "Of course. Let me just double-check that for you. In the meantime, you're welcome to wait in the lounge." Behind her, Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his grip tightening on the briefcase. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, his frustration barely contained. Samantha held up a hand, silencing him without looking back. Her focus remained on Sanders, who now gestured toward the luxurious terminal building, as if dismissing her entirely. "Very well," she said, her tone steady, betraying nothing of the irritation simmering beneath the surface. Without another word, she turned and began walking back toward the lounge. Her heels clicked against the tarmac, the sound measured and deliberate, a sharp counterpoint to the quiet murmurs that erupted among the crew as she passed. Inside the lounge, Marcus couldn't hold back any longer. "Samantha, this is unacceptable," he said, pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows. "They're mocking you, mocking us. Did you see the way they looked at you?" Samantha settled into a plush leather chair, her expression serene despite the tension in the room. She glanced at Marcus, her calm gaze softening the edge of his frustration. "I saw," she replied, "and I've seen it before." Her words carried a quiet gravity, a reminder that this wasn't the first time she'd faced such indignities. But Samantha was no stranger to prejudice wrapped in politeness, nor to the power dynamics that sought to diminish her accomplishments. Across the room, Marcus turned back to the window. Outside, the crew lingered near the jet, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. Their exaggerated gestures and sideways glances left little doubt about who or what they were mocking. Marcus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. This isn't just disrespect, it's blatant discrimination. Samantha leaned back, crossing her legs with practiced composure. Reaching for her phone, she began composing a message to her legal team. Every word she typed was precise, each detail of the encounter carefully documented. There would be no room for excuses. "We'll handle this the right way," she continued, glancing up at Marcus. Not with anger, but with accountability. Marcus exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He nodded, his faith in Samantha's leadership overriding his urge to act impulsively. Outside, the laughter subsided, but the air remained thick with unspoken tension. Samantha's eyes lingered on the jet for a moment longer before she returned her focus to the task at hand. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As Samantha reached the base of the jet's staircase, a man stepped forward from the crew, his polished uniform a stark contrast to the smirk playing on his face. Captain Thomas Sanders, the pilot, carried himself with an air of practiced authority. His piercing blue eyes swept over Samantha briefly, betraying a flicker of skepticism before he plastered on a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth but edged with a subtle condescension. "I'm afraid there might be a misunderstanding. This jet is reserved for VIPs." For a moment, the words hung in the air, cutting through the faint hum of engines in the background. Samantha's sharp gaze locked onto his, her expression unreadable. "There's no misunderstanding," she replied evenly. Her voice was calm, controlled, but carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "I am the VIP." Captain Sanders blinked, as if caught off guard by her directness. Then, as though recovering from his momentary lapse, his smirk deepened. "Ah," he said, dragging out the word. "Of course. Let me just double-check that for you. In the meantime, you're welcome to wait in the lounge." Behind her, Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his grip tightening on the briefcase. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, his frustration barely contained. Samantha held up a hand, silencing him without looking back. Her focus remained on Sanders, who now gestured toward the luxurious terminal building, as if dismissing her entirely. "Very well," she said, her tone steady, betraying nothing of the irritation simmering beneath the surface. Without another word, she turned and began walking back toward the lounge. Her heels clicked against the tarmac, the sound measured and deliberate, a sharp counterpoint to the quiet murmurs that erupted among the crew as she passed. Inside the lounge, Marcus couldn't hold back any longer. "Samantha, this is unacceptable," he said, pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows. "They're mocking you, mocking us. Did you see the way they looked at you?" Samantha settled into a plush leather chair, her expression serene despite the tension in the room. She glanced at Marcus, her calm gaze softening the edge of his frustration. "I saw," she replied, "and I've seen it before." Her words carried a quiet gravity, a reminder that this wasn't the first time she'd faced such indignities. But Samantha was no stranger to prejudice wrapped in politeness, nor to the power dynamics that sought to diminish her accomplishments. Across the room, Marcus turned back to the window. Outside, the crew lingered near the jet, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. Their exaggerated gestures and sideways glances left little doubt about who or what they were mocking. Marcus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. This isn't just disrespect, it's blatant discrimination. Samantha leaned back, crossing her legs with practiced composure. "And it will be dealt with," she said, her voice steady, unshaken. Reaching for her phone, she began composing a message to her legal team. Every word she typed was precise, each detail of the encounter carefully documented. There would be no room for excuses. "We'll handle this the right way," she continued, glancing up at Marcus. Not with anger, but with accountability. Marcus exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He nodded, his faith in Samantha's leadership overriding his urge to act impulsively. Outside, the laughter subsided, but the air remained thick with unspoken tension. Samantha's eyes lingered on the jet for a moment longer before she returned her focus to the task at hand. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Inside the opulent airport lounge, Samantha's calm exterior betrayed none of the storm brewing beneath the surface. The luxurious surroundings, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and leather seating felt like a hollow attempt to mask the sting of the humiliation she had just endured. She sank into one of the chairs with the poise of someone accustomed to holding her ground in the face of adversity. Marcus remained by the large floor-to-ceiling window, his tension evident in the stiff set of his shoulders. Outside, the jet crew huddled together, their body language smug and dismissive. Their glances toward the lounge, followed by stifled laughter, painted a clear picture of their arrogance. "Marcus," Samantha said, her voice soft yet commanding. He turned quickly, as though startled out of his thoughts. "Yes?" "Sit," she instructed, motioning to the seat across from her. Reluctantly, Marcus obeyed, placing her briefcase on the table between them. His expression still brimmed with indignation. "This isn't right, Samantha. They're mocking you, mocking us. And we're just sitting here letting them get away with it." Samantha rested her hands on her lap, her fingers interlaced. Her gaze was steady, her tone measured. "We're not letting anyone get away with anything." Marcus frowned, leaning forward. "Then what's the plan?" "The plan," she said, retrieving her phone from her bag, "is to address this strategically. Anger gets their attention. Strategy changes the system." Marcus watched as Samantha opened her notes app and began typing rapidly. Her demeanor was meticulous, every word she wrote had a purpose. She outlined the incident with clinical precision, the smirk on Captain Saunders' face, the condescension in his tone, the refusal to acknowledge her authority. Each detail was a piece of a puzzle that she intended to complete. "You're writing this all down?" Marcus asked, his voice laced with both curiosity and admiration. "Every word," Samantha confirmed. "I've learned that memory can be dismissed, but documentation is irrefutable." As she continued, Marcus' frustration gradually gave way to understanding. Samantha wasn't passive, she was deliberate. Moments later, Samantha sent the detailed account to her legal team. Alongside it, she included a request to review company policies for discriminatory practices and a draft for a public statement. She didn't intend to take action just for herself. This was about addressing a larger issue. "I've also looped in our PR team," she said, looking up at Marcus. "When this is over, there won't be any doubt about what happened or who was at fault." Marcus leaned back, nodding slowly. "You're playing the long game." "The only game that matters," Samantha replied. Outside the lounge, the crew's laughter had died down, but their arrogance still lingered in their posture. Marcus followed Samantha's gaze as it drifted back to the window. "They don't think there will be consequences," Marcus murmured. "They rarely do," Samantha replied. "That's why it's so important to show them otherwise." For a moment, the room fell silent, except for the faint hum of activity beyond the glass walls. Then Samantha leaned forward, her tone softening slightly. "Marcus, I need you to trust me," she said. "I do," he replied without hesitation. Always. Good, Samantha said. Because when this is over, it won't just be about them knowing my name. It'll be about what we're building, what no one can ignore. Her words carried a quiet power, the kind that could topple barriers and shake the foundations of complacency. The lounge door opened, interrupting the moment. Samantha's calm gaze shifted to the entrance, her composure unshaken. Captain Sanders appeared, his smug expression intact as he stepped forward. Unfortunately, he began, his voice dripping with false regret. The jet's owner isn't available right now. We'll need more time to sort this out. Samantha rose slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. The air in the room shifted as she fixed him with a steady, unwavering stare. Good, she said, her voice carrying the faintest edge. Let's discuss this now. She strode past him without waiting for a response, Marcus following closely behind. Her heels echoed against the marble floor, each step signaling that this battle had only just begun. As Samantha settled into the plush leather chair of the lounge, the luxurious surroundings did little to distract her from the familiar sting of the moment. Her gaze drifted toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the jet loomed in the distance, a symbol of her achievements, now tainted by the arrogance of others. She crossed her legs deliberately, maintaining her composure, but her thoughts were anything but calm. This wasn't the first time Samantha had been underestimated. Memories surfaced unbidden, like echoes of battles fought long ago. She was 12 again, standing in her middle school classroom as the teacher handed back math quizzes. Samantha's paper bore a bright red A, but instead of praise, the teacher's gaze lingered on her, skeptical. Did someone help you with this, Samantha? The teacher had asked, her voice dripping with doubt. The insinuation had stung, but Samantha had only straightened her back and replied, No, I studied. The same quiet resilience had followed her into college, where she was one of the few black students in her computer science program. In a group project for an advanced coding course, her suggestions were routinely ignored until a male classmate repeated them verbatim. It wasn't until the professor commended her work in front of the class that anyone acknowledged her contributions. Even as a rising entrepreneur, Samantha had faced closed doors. She remembered sitting across from an investor, pitching her first app, a groundbreaking tool for visualizing data in real time. His response had been polite but dismissive. It's ambitious, he had said, his tone making it clear that ambitious wasn't a compliment. And yet, each slight had forged her resolve. The skepticism had driven her to refine her ideas until they were undeniable. The dismissals had fueled her determination to create products that couldn't be ignored. Success wasn't a shield, but it had become her weapon, a way to carve out space in a world that often sought to exclude her. Now, sitting in the lounge with Marcus pacing nearby, Samantha felt the weight of those moments intertwine with the present. The laughter of the crew outside was a hauntingly familiar soundtrack, a reminder that no matter how high she climbed, the biases of others could still attempt to pull her down. But those biases didn't define her, they never had. Samantha turned her gaze to Marcus, whose frustration mirrored the anger she refused to show. She thought of her father's voice, steady and sure, telling her as a child, "The world will try to tell you who you are. Don't listen. Show them." As Samantha's grip on her phone tightened, this wasn't just about her. Every battle she'd fought had paved the way for others who didn't yet have the voice or platform to demand better. Today was no different. She glanced at the jet again, its polished silver exterior gleaming in the sunlight. It wasn't just a symbol of her success. It was a reminder of the power she had earned, the power she would use to confront this injustice, not with anger, but with action. Samantha exhaled slowly, her calm returning like an old friend. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just another chapter, and as always, she intended to write it her way. Samantha's fingers moved deftly across her phone screen as she finalized her message to her legal teammen. The lounge's quiet opulence, the hum of distant engines, the faint clink of glassware faded into the background. Every detail of the incident was carefully outlined. The patronizing smirk of Captain Sanders, his dismissive tone, and the crew's thinly veiled arrogance. Samantha understood the importance of precision. This wasn't just about her, it was about accountability. Marcus stood nearby, watching her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "What's the next step?" he asked, breaking the silence. Samantha glanced up briefly, her expression calm but focused. "First, we document everything. Words are often dismissed, but a written record has weight." She pressed send, dispatching her account to her legal team along with a directive, initiate an investigation into the crew's behavior, and review any company policies that might enable such conduct. The system, Samantha knew, often relied on ambiguity to evade responsibility. Her job was to eliminate that ambiguity. Next, she opened a secure messaging app to contact her public relations team. "We'll need to control the narrative," she said aloud, half to herself, half to Marcus. "If they're willing to dismiss me, imagine how they'd treat someone without the resources or platform to fight back." Marcus nodded, his frustration giving way to understanding. "You're not just addressing this for yourself." "Never," Samantha replied firmly. Her Puerto Rico team responded swiftly, offering strategies to frame the story in a way that highlighted the systemic nature of the issue. Samantha's request was clear: focus on the broader implications. This wasn't about a single incident. It was a pattern that needed to be addressed. Across the room, Marcus continued pacing. Outside, the crew's laughter had subsided, replaced by a nervous energy as they lingered near the jet. Their exaggerated confidence had begun to falter, and Marcus noticed. "They're starting to realize they messed with the wrong person," he said with a small, satisfied grin. Samantha remained unflinching. "Good. But this isn't about teaching them a lesson. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen again." She placed her phone down momentarily, folding her hands in her lap. "Marcus, I need you to check something for me. Go back out there and see if they're still ignoring their duties." Marcus hesitated, his protective instincts kicking in. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said with a nod. As Marcus stepped out, Samantha allowed herself a moment of reflection. This wasn't just another inconvenience. It was a defining moment, a chance to turn indignation into meaningful action. When Marcus returned, his expression was a mixture of satisfaction and exasperation. "They're just standing around," he reported, acting like nothing's happened. Samantha's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes remained sharp. Perfect. The clearer their complacency, the harder it will be for them to justify. Picking up her phone again, she drafted another message, this time to the airline's executive office. By the time she finished, she had detailed not just her own experience, but the behavior she observed, attaching Marcus' footage for good measure. "Now," she said, placing her phone down again, "we wait for their response. But we don't wait quietly." The battle wasn't over, but Samantha had ensured she wasn't fighting it alone. She wasn't just reacting, she was leading, with strategy as her sharpest weapon. The marble floor of the lounge echoed with the sharp, deliberate clicks of Samantha's heels as she strode toward the door. Behind her, Marcus followed closely, his briefcase tucked under one arm, and his expression a mix of determination and anticipation. The time for passive observation had ended. Captain Thomas Sanders stood at the base of the jet's staircase, his arms crossed and his posture exuding the same smug confidence he had displayed earlier. His crew remained nearby, their initial arrogance now tinged with unease. Samantha's approach did not go unnoticed. As she neared, Thomas turned to greet her with a smile that carried no warmth. "I'm afraid we still haven't resolved the issue, Miss Johnson," he began, his voice laced with mock regret. "The jet's owner isn't available to confirm your claim." Samantha stopped a few feet away, her gaze steady and unyielding. She reached into her bag, retrieving a sleek leather folio. "You won't need to wait for anyone else," she said, her tone crisp. "I have the documents right here." Thomas blinked, his confidence faltering for the first time. Samantha opened the folio and pulled out a set of official ownership papers, presenting them with the calm authority of someone who knew the weight of their words. "This jet," she said, her voice unwavering, "is mine. Every inch of it, from the engines to the cabin. And you've wasted enough of my time pretending otherwise." The silence that followed was palpable. Thomas hesitated before taking the papers, his hands trembling slightly as he scanned the contents. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado now replaced with visible discomfort. One of the younger crew members stepped forward, his voice shaky. We didn't know," he stammered, his eyes darting between Samantha and Thomas. "You didn't bother to find out," Samantha replied, her tone sharp. She turned back to Thomas. "You had every opportunity to confirm my identity before making baseless assumptions. Instead, you chose to dismiss me. That was your decision. Now, face the consequences." Thomas stammered, his words failing him. I didn't mean." Samantha cut him off with a raised hand. "Enough. Gather your team and your belongings. You're dismissed effective immediately." The crew froze, their shock evident. Samantha's gaze remained firm, giving no room for negotiation. Marcus stepped forward, his phone discreetly angled to capture the moment. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and the gravity of their actions now hung over the crew like a storm cloud. One by one, they began to move, their steps heavy with shame as they retrieved their bags and uniforms. Samantha watched them go, her posture unrelenting but composed. She knew the significance of this moment, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. Thomas lingered at the base of the stairs, his defiance crumbling. "Mims, Johnson," he began, his voice low. I didn't realize." "You didn't care to," Samantha interjected, her voice like steel. "That's the problem. It's not ignorance, it's arrogance. And arrogance has no place in my crew." With that, she ascended the staircase, her movements deliberate and powerful. At the top, she paused, turning back to face the now empty tarmac below. The jet's polished silver exterior gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol of her success reclaimed. Marcus joined her at the top of the stairs, his expression reflecting both pride and vindication. "What's next?" he asked quietly. Samantha's gaze remained steady on the horizon. "We fly to New York. But this isn't over. It's only the beginning." With a nod, Marcus stepped aside, and Samantha entered the jet's cabin, her presence filling the space with an undeniable sense of purpose. The engines roared to life moments later, a fitting prelude to the journey ahead. Samantha stood at the foot of the jet's stairs, her presence commanding and unwavering. The air on the tarmac seemed heavier now, the earlier murmur of the crew replaced with an uneasy silence. Captain Thomas Sanders shifted uncomfortably, his usual smug expression faltering under the weight of Samantha's gaze. She held the documents firmly in her hand, the undeniable proof of her ownership. Her voice, calm yet razor-sharp, cut through the tension. "I've had enough of this nonsense. This jet belongs to me. You've disrespected me, my time, and everything I stand for. Now, I'm giving you one final instruction. Gather your belongings and leave." The words landed with the force of a gavel in a courtroom. The crew froze, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Captain Sanders opened his mouth to speak, but Samantha raised a hand, silencing him without a word. Marcus, standing a few steps behind her, lifted his phone discreetly, ensuring every second of the moment was captured on video. "You heard me," Samantha continued, her tone steady but unyielding. "You and your team are dismissed, effective immediately." One of the younger crew members hesitated, looking towards Sanders for guidance. When no defense came, his gaze fell to the ground, and he shuffled toward the lounge to retrieve his belongings. One by one, the others followed, their earlier confidence crumbling into visible discomfort. Sanders remained rooted to the spot, his pride battling the reality of the situation. "Miss Johnson, surely we can." "Surely we cannot," Samantha interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "Your conduct has been unacceptable, and there are no second chances here. This isn't about ignorance, it's about arrogance, and that arrogance has consequences." Marcus captured every detail, the slight tremble in Sanders' hands, the collective shame of the crew as they moved to comply. The same individuals who had laughed and mocked Samantha mere moments ago now avoided her gaze entirely. Samantha didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. Her words, delivered with precise calm, carried far more weight than any display of anger ever could. The crew returned, their uniforms folded and belongings in hand. One of the attendants, her earlier smugness replaced with a subdued demeanor, paused in front of Samantha. "I'm sorry," she muttered, though her voice was barely audible. Samantha tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Sorry won't undo the damage," she replied, "but I hope you learn from this." The attendant nodded quickly, then hurried off toward the terminal. Captain Sanders was the last to leave. He hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale and drawn. "Mims, Johnson," he began, his voice weak. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to what?" Samantha asked, her voice still even but cutting. "Dismiss me? Undermine me? Mock me? Or was it that you didn't mean to get caught?" He had no response, his silence speaking louder than any apology could. Samantha stepped aside, gesturing toward the lounge. "Your team is waiting for you. Join them." With that, Sanders turned and walked away, his posture defeated. Marcus kept the camera rolling until the entire crew had disappeared into the terminal building. Only then did he lower his phone, turning to Samantha with a mixture of awe and satisfaction. "That," he said, shaking his head, "was a masterclass." Samantha allowed herself a brief smile, though her composure didn't waver. It wasn't about them, she said quietly. It's about what comes next. She ascended the stairs to her jet, her steps steady and deliberate. At the top, she paused, turning back to look at the empty tarmac. For the first time since the confrontation began, she let out a small sigh. This was just the beginning. Inside the cabin, Samantha settled into the plush seat she had earned through years of hard work. Marcus joined her shortly after, his phone already buzzing with notifications. "The footage is powerful," he said, glancing at the screen. "People need to see this." "They will," Samantha replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon outside the window. "But not yet. First, we need to make sure it's part of a bigger conversation." The jet engines roared to life, and Samantha leaned back in her seat. This wasn't just a flight, it was a statement. As Samantha's jet touched down in New York, Marcus was already reviewing the footage from earlier, his phone lighting up with notifications. The video of the crew's dismissal, recorded with precision and care, was more than just a personal vindication, it was a statement. Every frame captured the shift in power, from the smug arrogance of Captain Sanders to the unshakable resolve of Samantha standing at the top of her jet stairs. "This needs to go out," Marcus said, his voice tinged with urgency as they disembarked. "Not yet," Samantha replied, her calm demeanor unchanged. "When we release this, it has to be more than a viral moment. It needs purpose." Over the next few hours, Samantha worked with her PR team to craft a narrative that transcended the personal. The video wasn't framed as a billionaire confronting an arrogant crew, it became a rallying cry against systemic bias in professional spaces. Alongside the video, Samantha wrote a statement that spoke directly to the heart of the issue. "This isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows individuals to dismiss and undermine others based on assumptions. Bias doesn't disappear with success or wealth, it's entrenched in the way we treat people. It's time to confront it, demand accountability, and work toward change." The video and statement were released simultaneously. Within hours, they ignited a firestorm on social media. Hashtags like #NoHerNam, Privilege Check, and Stand With Samantha trended worldwide, as people from all walks of life shared their own stories of being dismissed or underestimated. Samantha's calm but powerful demeanor in the footage became a symbol of strength in the face of bias. News outlets quickly picked up the story, airing segments that analyzed not just the incident, but the broader issues it represented. Samantha appeared on major networks, her poised presence commanding respect as she spoke about the need for systemic change. "This isn't an isolated event," she told one interviewer. "It's part of a pattern. And until we address the structures that allow these patterns to persist, we'll continue to see them play out." The airline's response was swift but insufficient. Their initial statement, filled with vague apologies and promises to review protocols, only fueled public outrage. People demanded concrete action, not corporate jargon. Calls for boycotts gained momentum, and other prominent figures joined the conversation, using their platforms to amplify Samantha's message. Meanwhile, Samantha announced the launch of Open Skies, an initiative designed to promote inclusivity in aviation. The program would provide scholarships for aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds, mandatory diversity training for crew members, and mentorship opportunities to dismantle barriers. The reaction was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from individuals and organizations alike, many offering to partner with Samantha's initiative. What had started as an incident of personal prejudice had evolved into a global movement for accountability and equity. Samantha had reclaimed her narrative not through anger, but with purpose and power. The days following the incident marked the beginning of something far greater than Samantha could have anticipated. The public outcry and the momentum generated by her story had forced the airline industry, and many others, to confront their own biases. But Samantha wasn't content to let the moment fade into a news cycle. She knew that real change required sustained effort. Standing at a podium in a packed conference room, Samantha addressed a global audience for the launch of her initiative, Open Skies. The program's mission was clear: to create a more inclusive aviation industry and provide opportunities for those often overlooked. "We're starting with 3 pillars," Samantha explained, her voice steady and firm. "Scholarships for aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds, mandatory diversity training for all crew and staff, and mentorship programs designed to break systemic barriers. This is about more than representation. It's about equity, accountability, and progress." The announcement was met with overwhelming support. Applications for the scholarships flooded in within hours, many from young people who had always dreamed of flying but had never seen themselves reflected in the cockpit. Samantha's initiative offered them not just resources but a sense of belonging. Corporate leaders and policymakers also took notice. Several airlines publicly committed to adopting aspects of open skies, offering their own funding and infrastructure to expand the initiative's reach. Samantha became a sought-after speaker, invited to share her vision at industry summits and global forums. Her story had become a case study in how one moment of injustice could inspire systemic reform. But the most profound impact was felt on a personal level. Letters and messages poured into Samantha's office, each one a testament to the lives she had touched. One stood out. A young black woman who had been accepted into a pilot training program wrote, "For the first time, I believe I can belong here. Thank you for fighting for us." Samantha kept the letter on her desk as a reminder of why this work mattered. Meanwhile, the individuals responsible for the incident faced the consequences of their actions. Captain Sanders and his crew were officially dismissed from their roles, and their names became cautionary tales in discussions about workplace bias. The airline itself underwent a rigorous overhaul, implementing new policies to address the systemic issues Samantha had exposed. Despite these victories, Samantha knew the work was far from over. Real change wasn't a single initiative or policy. It was a cultural shift, one that required persistence and vigilance. A few weeks later, Samantha boarded her jet for the first flight under the Open Skies banner. The cabin was alive with energy, staffed by a diverse and enthusiastic crew who embodied the values she had fought for. As the engines roared to life, Samantha gazed out at the endless horizon. This journey wasn't just hers, it belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. It was about showing the world what could be achieved when barriers were broken and opportunities were shared. And Samantha wasn't just reaching for the sky. She was setting the stage for others to soar. Months after the incident, Samantha Johnson sat in her office, sunlight streaming through the tall windows as she reviewed updates on Open Skies. The initiative had taken off literally and figuratively, garnering widespread acclaim for its groundbreaking approach to fostering inclusivity in aviation. Scholarships had already been awarded to dozens of aspiring pilots, and mentorship programs were connecting seasoned professionals with eager young minds ready to break barriers. On the edge of her desk sat a small photo sent by a scholarship recipient, a young woman in a pilot's uniform, smiling brightly in front of a plane. The handwritten note accompanying it read, "Thank you for making this possible." Samantha held the photo for a moment, her chest swelling with quiet pride. The viral video and its aftermath had sparked a broader reckoning across industries. Samantha's story became a touchstone for discussions on systemic bias, empowering countless individuals to speak up and demand change. Her voice had become more than a beacon, it was a movement. Still, Samantha understood this was only the beginning. Real progress required persistence, and she was committed to seeing it through. As she glanced out her window at the bustling city below, Samantha smiled. She thought of her father's words, "They don't get to decide your future. You do." And Samantha had done just that, not just for herself, but for generations to come. The sky was no longer the limit. It was only the beginning.